you can see I've got all my audio files. I keep my reference track at the top. So this is the rough mix at the very top here. When I'm kind of speaking to whoever I'm speaking to that's bringing me the mix, whether it be the producer, the artist, or the manager, or even if it's just my management who are dealing with them and they just send me the parts, I'm trying to get as much information from the client as possible before I get into the mix. So what is their reference track? If they, if they're doing a pop tune and the reference track is like Dua Lipa, what is it about that song that they really like? Like, is it the vocal? Like, is there a reverb? Is the drum sound something that I really like? Get as much information from the client as you can. And that goes to like tempo of the track. That becomes important when you're setting up a session. BPM, key of the track as well is really useful. All of these little things will add into making your mix process so much smoother. You can see like in the session here, I've got it kind of labeled at the top. So start V1 pre hook all the way to the end. That means, again, it means I can just like cut here and loop a section with like no hassle, and I can just keep the hook on a loop if they want me to work on that a bit more, or if they say, oh, second pre, there's like a snare that's too loud, then I can just go in there and, chop in and check what's going on. So again, these are like the unglamorous side of mixing, and I promise I will get into like the fun stuff very, very soon. But again, this stuff is so important because any mixing engineers that I know who are working with like majors or are doing it as a full-time job, they're like so proficient, so organized. It's just really, really important. So develop your mixing skills, and we'll get into how to do that now, but also just take time to figure out a process that works for you in terms of, labeling, organization and stuff. I've got a note here to speak about listening vs hearing. So you might have this now. Sometimes we're listening to people and everything, it's kind of just going a bit blurry. You're not like, they're saying words like I'm sure I'm saying now, and it's just a bit like white noisy, and it's not really like, you're not kind of hearing the words that they're saying. Like, we all know what it feels like when we're having a conversation one-on-one with someone and you really feel heard by that person. They're really engaged with you. They're really listening, taking in every word that you say. You feel heard rather than just like listening blankly. We have a real, there's a real kind of, how do I put it? Because everything is so visual now, we're not on big desks anymore. We're all kind of mixing in Pro Tools or Logic, and it's all on the screen. Sometimes we can fall into the trap of mixing with our eyes, and that's a dangerous trap to go down. You might think, oh, well, I'm going to do this bass, and I'm just going to pull the EQ. Like, I'm sure I've probably, my bass is here. Yeah, so I'll cut some low and cut some high. And it's so easy to just like drag this and do it by sight rather than like really listening. So I always like to kind of stress to mix with your ears and not with your eyes. And that sounds simple, but like actually taking a step away from the screen and listening to the music without seeing what's happening makes a big difference. And also listening at very low volumes as well. Like, anyone can make a beat slap or like a kick and snare hit really hard if it's cranked really, really loud. The trick is getting a song sounding intense and exciting at a really low volume. So you'll be able to tell if your mix is like giving off good energy, if when you listen to it at a low volume, it still sounds exciting and there's still bits of ear candy like popping out for you. And I will talk about how I go about doing some of that. Is there any questions so far about anything? No? All good? Cool. Another thing that I thought would be cool to talk about is our taste. So I kind of touched on it there at the beginning a little bit. Sometimes I'll have people come to me because they like what they've heard that I've done previously. And that is, all of us will hear and interpret a song differently. And that's what makes you, you. So sometimes we can look at what other people are doing and think, okay, well, that mixer has achieved this sound and they're being really successful. I'm going to try and emulate that. But, you know, there's only one Dave Pensado and there's only one like Manny Marroquin and stuff. And yes, we can take tips from them. And I think the most valuable thing to take from those guys is more about their philosophy and their mixing approach, or their approach to professionalism or building a client base, rather than like, you know, why did they use that compressor, or like, oh, they've used that EQ, or, you know, that tape plugin, or whatever else it is. That stuff is useful, but not nearly as useful as the kind of philosophy behind it. Just because we might listen to the same song and I'll hear it a completely different way to the way that you guys hear it as well. So kind of embrace your taste a little bit. And eventually, once you've got the technical aspects of mixing down, which are, it's the more simple side. I'm by no means a technical engineer at all, and I've spoken to a lot of mixing engineers, and they always kind of say like it's all about like the vibe and it's all about feeling, and it really is. And I suppose at uni, I was just building my technical skills up to a level where I could then kind of express myself artistically in a mix. So yeah, embrace your taste is another kind of cool little tidbit. So fortunately, this mix was produced by a guy called Daniel, and he did a fantastic job at labeling all of the stems when he sent them to me. So if you can see on the left-hand side here, it says basement '01 kick, basement '02 snare, and then all of the audio files are like, that's the number of the stem. So he's exported it out of probably Logic, and he's labeled them all, so he knows kick stem number 1 is kick, stem number 2 is snare, 3 hi-hat, 4, 5, and it just goes like that the whole way through the session. So it's not different versions, it's just all the different audio files. Again, like, that is an absolute dream to work with as a mixing engineer, because there's nothing worse than like loading all the files into a mix session and it being like audio 1, audio 6, audio 12, and there's no, it's not like kick or snare or guitar, it's just like audio all the way to 150, and then I have to spend a good 2 hours like late going through and individually listening and labeling everything. Like, I don't want to do that, because it's a big job and I'm not getting paid to do that. But also, I want to get to like the creative side of mixing as soon as possible, just because we'll touch on this as well, but the first movements you're making are often like the important ones, because it's you can't re-listen to a song for the first time. So your first impression of the song is really important, I believe. And that's where I'm making like more of my kind of bigger movements rather than like little individual ones. Does that answer your question? All good? Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Tempo, track markers at the top here. Just out of interest, is anyone using Pro Tools at the moment? Yeah, Pro Tools. A few. Logic, Ableton, Cubase, Studio One, Reaper, Fruity Loops. Okay, cool. So Logic and Pro Tools and a bit of Cubase and stuff. Yeah, cool. Just try and apply this to those, because it's the same essentially. It doesn't actually matter which DAW you use. It's just whichever. The only reason I use Pro Tools is because I literally had to. Again, this is a good example of me not being prepared and it costing me a job. I turned up to a session with a producer in America with Logic good to go, and I pulled up and he was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Recording your vocals." And he's like, "We only use Pro Tools." And I was like, "Cool." So I had to pay for a taxi to go to the Guitar Center from downtown, which cost like $50, and then $50 the other way, and then I had to buy Pro Tools there and then, which was like, I can't even remember how much it was. It was like probably like $500. And I was 24 at the time and pulling my hair out like I have no money. So that's my bad, preparation. I didn't know that was going to happen. And by the time I got back, he'd already got someone to come in and do it. So I lost a job anyway. And then I was just stuck with Pro Tools, which I didn't know how to use. I was just like, but yeah, lessons. If you call it that. I suppose what I would say about like making mistakes is like make them now because you can. But if I make a mistake now with like a high profile client or a major label or, I'm probably going to lose a job, and then the industry is fairly small. So like word spreads and, those types of mistakes just don't really happen, and you just can't afford to have them happen when you get to a point. Yeah, so the markers is important. My color coding, and again, you can do this like however you want, but in my mind, drums are in red, bass is in blue, instrumentation is in orange, lead vocal is yellow, hook vocals are in green, backing vocals in blue, ad-libs are in like bluey green, and then all my effects like reverbs and delays are in purple. So I know, like, I could open up a mix from 5 years ago and it will be laid out exactly the same, like color wise, and it just makes it easy for me to like move around the session like quickly. I know where everything is, what color it is, so that type of thing is really useful. Gain staging as well. Oh yeah, cool.
To use the same colours in every project.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, kick is always like this pinky color, red for drums, blue. So yeah, and then if I have like parallels, so like parallel compression on any particular part, it's always this like greeny color. So that's my parallel drum, and that's my parallel bass. I don't think I've got any others. Oh yeah, and I've got some guitar parallels there as well. Yeah, so always the same colors, just for efficiency. Like if I went rogue and used a bunch of different colors on like the next mix, then I just wouldn't know where I stood in terms of like returning to those mixes. Another thing that is important is kind of like gain structure in a mix as well. So when I first started kind of mixing or learning to mix, I was in Logic actually. And, again, drums is a good example. I would have my kick, snare, hi-hat, all running straight to my master fader. I think in Logic it's just like stereo out. So I had everything just running to stereo out. And that's a lot of information that's a lot of gain for one channel to be receiving on its own. So I'd have to turn everything down by like minus 12 dB just so my master out wasn't clipping. What I do now is if we follow the lead vocal, because that's a good kind of example. So this is my lead here. The lead is sent to my lead aux, which is here. That lead aux gets sent to my vocal aux, which also receives hook, BV. So the individuals get sent to a bus. Those buses get sent to a bus. And then that vocal aux gets sent to another vocal bus. And then that gets sent to my mix bus. So there are like always 3 or 4 steps before I'm hitting my master fader. So that means I have more control over each individual element. If I want to turn my lead vocal down in the mix, I can go to my lead aux and just bring that down. If I want to bring all of my vocals down in the mix, but nothing else, I can come up here to my Vox and bring that down. As you can see, I've done some like multi-band compression on all of the vocals, so they sit a bit cleaner in the mix. It just gives you more control at more points in the mix. So that has been quite a helpful thing for me that I learnt a fair while ago.